folks. Well, here we go. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at IMF 2020. My name is Jamie Haskell, and I'm coming to you from Mountmaking Focus Studio in Seattle, Washington, USA. I hope some of you got to check out the shop in the shop tour yesterday. If not, we can go back to the tour later. As with all presentations in the forum, this is being recorded, and this building is a working building with woodworking shops below me, so I'm hoping that the noise of saws and routers won't get in the way. I'm thrilled that you've all joined us for day 4 of this amazing forum. I feel so lucky to have been involved with the Mountmakers Forum since the initial exploratory gathering at the Getty Museum Villa in 2006. We've watched this biennial forum grow from a small group at that first meeting to the amazing international event that was held at the Natural History Museum in London 2 years ago. I think I can speak for everybody in the group that the realization that COVID was going to deny us this year's meeting at the Getty Center hit us all like a ton of bricks. As we sat together on Zoom, trying to envision a basic website or something to fill this void, Shelley Uhler of the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian made the outrageous suggestion that we do a virtual event. I don't think any of us had a clue how special this would end up being. I want to give a big shout out to Shelley and to Laura McClure, Elizabeth Soriano, Sam Hamilton, Emmy Sabacool, Pierre-Luc Brouillet, the IMF board, and so many other members of the International Mountmakers Forum who have made this event a reality. I'm in awe of the thought and energy that's gone into this. Although I realize I shouldn't be surprised at all. In true Mountmaker fashion, when confronted with a truly monumental and unconventional problem on deadline, they will come up with the most amazing solutions. It is exactly this sort of problem solving that drives each of us to do this complex, creative, and exacting work. Although we can't hear each other unless they unmute everybody's mics, I'm going to ask you all to right now give a huge round of applause to the amazing group that's made this possible. Right now. That's, I felt that from New Zealand all the way around the world to Egypt and beyond. Wow, you're fabulous. So back to the forum. What an amazing day we've got coming up for you. We've got talks from Erica Johnson and Jen Simons from Bridget Mountmaking, freelance Mountmaker Jody Hansen from Buffalo, New York, and Nick Pedamonte from the American Museum of Natural History about working at the Met, Brett Angel from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, Laura McClure from the National Museum of American History, and finally, Gwen Spicer of Spicer Art Conservation speaking with Yadine Larachette of TrueView USA. After all that, we're going to have a panel discussion on using magnets in mount making, which I think is going to be amazing. So now that we've got the early session basically covered, there's a few things we need to acknowledge and talk about so everything can go smoothly. First, we gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we all gather today, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their homes here today. I'm here in the land of the Duwamish, and I want to acknowledge them and all the First Nations of the Pacific Northwest. Please note that your microphones will be muted and cameras turned off during the presentations. We are recording all the presentations to eventually post to the IMF YouTube channel, so we want the audio quality to be as good as possible. We are also live streaming this on YouTube at the IMF's channel. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. If you have questions for a specific person, please use their name so they know it's directed to them. We will try to address as many questions as we can at the end of each presentation. There's so many things today. Question time is going to be a little squished, so maybe post early. Any questions we can't get to through the Q&A can be brought up during our after parties, which I really encourage you to come to. They're great fun. Or through the Slack app, hashtag day 4 early session. To join the 7th IMF Slack channel, go to the link that's on the in the chat right now. I haven't seen it, but should be a link coming in the chat. Also, feel free to contact the presenters directly. Each presenter's abstract and bio are on the IMF's website, mountmakersforum.net, IMF 2020, day 4. So now, with all that said, we need to move ahead to our very first session. For our final day, our first session is beginning with Erica Johnson and Jen Simons of Bridget Mountmaking USA and their delightful presentation, What Your Mountmaking Mama Never Told You. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Linda Johnson. I'm 14 and I'm not a Mountmaker. I'm here on behalf of Bridget Mountmaking because they, like good mounts, prefer not to be seen. They've asked me to share this presentation on how they work as contractors who travel to museums. Communication is so important to creating good object displays, and we hope that a deeper understanding of this process will help museums who work with contractors. We also hope that some of the tips and techniques they develop during their travels will be helpful to the Mountmaking community. A little background for anyone not yet aware of this, but there is no shared and established path for learning Mountmaking. Skills are passed down through an apprenticeship-like tradition, but materials and ideas are always changing. For comparison, think of conservators. They have an advanced degree and they tend to specialize in a type of object, like books or textiles. Mountmakers have no official training, but they are both determining the book angles and building and fitting the mannequins. They're working on tiny, delicate pieces and rigging enormous sculptures. It's an enormous responsibility and anybody can list it on their resume. I've made some mounts. I could call myself a Mountmaker. For this reason, we think it's important for museums to know what to expect when they work with contract Mountmakers, and we're also kind of excited to share the things we've learned through the years. When we travel to museums, we break down the process into 5 stages: templating, fabricating, fitting, finishing, and installing. Apologies for being really basic here, but this is how we measure. Templating starts with a discussion with the museum about the display intent and feeling out object needs. Sometimes an object is drawn upright but would be safer or use a less obtrusive mount at an angle. It would be great if we had these conversations earlier in the design process, but this is when we're brought into a project. We start with getting a feel for the weight balance of the object. This daguerreotype is intended to be deck mounted at an angle. We do a simple outline, then plan out the stem location. In this case, we want to keep the stem low, aligned with the bottom hinge so it will be hidden. We draw lines to indicate the front tab locations, and note the rod location with the circled X. This mount won't need side tabs because of the shape of the object and angle, but it will need support arms up the back. We like using graph paper to keep things aligned and as a background for photos to later confirm dimensions. We check the object depth and how long the front tab should be. And then we trace a top view. We then note the distance off the deck or wall and display angle and take photos. We don't create detailed mount drawings except for large steel or special mounts. Instead, we want to talk through a mount design while handling the object with our client. We find that sketching out a mount plan doesn't add much value or improve communication. So this is basically everything we would bring to a templating appointment. We like to work with a safety square, which is a piece of colored fleece, the kind we use to cover mannequins. We like to keep smaller objects on the safety square, which helps create a visual barrier so that our tools don't end up too close to an object, which can totally happen, especially during fitting. The angle tool on the left is essential. We've confused ourselves a lot at first talking about display angles until we started specifying whether we were measuring off the deck or off the wall. In the pencil, Papermate number 2 is the only way to go. Fancy mechanical pencils are a pain. These pencils are perfect on every level. Dial calipers are a must. Mostly we use ours for transcribing dimensions to drawings. You can of course take external, internal, and depth measurements. Mylar is great to have on hand for anything you need to measure from the front, and we're fans of cutting up and taping together cardstock for anything tricky. These scissors are amazing. Tonic Studios non-stick micro-serrated 5-inch mini snips. They're heavy-duty scissors, but they're great for precise trimming of suede and felt without getting covered in gunk. We return to our shops for fabricating mountain blanks. We each have our own shop, Deanna in Illinois and Jen and Erica in Maryland. Sometimes we make blanks on-site, but in most cases, off-site fabrication is most cost-effective. Welcome to Erica's workshop. Remember to always tie your hair up in the shop. Jen and Deanna are set up for steel, but here we're set up for brass and acrylic. We order most of our brass through K&S, which used to be called Special Shapes. K&S carries alloy 260 brass, which is essential for bending and doesn't have the lead like 360. That's important with the amount of dust we produce. With the end of Special Shapes, the range of sizes got smaller. We bought up the remaining stock of 1/16 by 1/8. Sorry, guys. But K&S are still awesome because they offer 40% off orders over $500 and smaller discounts for smaller orders. So, if you've been paying full price for K&S brass at McMaster, you can thank us with cookies. With Special Shapes no longer making special shapes, we're relying on a rolling mill. Peppy Tools makes a high-quality rolling mill that we use to make flat stock. Rolled brass has beautiful round edges. For soldering, we use oxyacetylene torches. This one's a little torch, which we kind of have a love-hate relationship with. We also use Harris Safety Silver at number 56 for soldering. And our fire bricks we get from the hardware store, which we like so much better than the crumbly white vermiculite ones. And of course, the acid bath. This is a very important step. We find the oven silicone gloves and a pasta strainer are super handy to have around. This is what happens when you don't clean the flux off a mount. Flux causes corrosion when brass isn't properly cleaned. We've seen this green growing on mounts and cases on display at major museums. Clean mounts are so important to object safety. This spice is Extension Jaws by Nate Crouch. Probably everyone is familiar with a bender. A word of caution to newcomers starting out, you want to do a light. The vise is the place for the boing test. Objects on long stems should not be springing around like a jack-in-the-box or sagging on the wall from the weight of an object. A note to designers, we really want to know how far off the case we are so we can appropriately size stems. We like to use telescoping tubes with set screws for rigidity. Tap and through drill bit organizers are very helpful. If you're having trouble getting your bit through steel, check the sizing because the sizing for steel is different than that of brass. Also, a cassette tape organizer works great for storing your extra drill bits. If you're using one of those little 1-inch sanders, you're going to want to treat yourself to the 1-inch knife sharpening sander with a longer belt, which makes it really easy to reach around corners. The medium density Scotch right wheel is a necessity, as is the red scrubby. It's important to feel edges after sanding. It's really easy to sand mount edges into little razors. So it won't look as pretty, but it's safer to blunt the inside of a mount tab to a round finish. So that's basically the shop. We would love to have a hardened lathe with power feed and digital readouts, but this is really all you need for mount making. And now that the blanks are complete, it's time to return to the museum. This is our stackable traveling toolkit. The boxes each fit through an X-ray machine and are easy to get in and out of vehicles. This holds everything we need for fitting and install and also doubles as an install tool cart. Tools get heavy, so we only want to carry around what works. The fitting tools that work are Xuron 475 short nose. They're perfectly designed for getting sharp bends on mount arms. For bigger stuff, we love our monkeys. These are also called Ford or Coase wrenches. We prefer the monkeys with slimmer profiles and without fat wood handles. This is our custom Mountmaker screwdriver. It's short and stubby to free up your fingers for handling screws while attaching mount clamps. The handle fits into your hand so that the screwdriver doesn't drop while you're aligning a mount clamp. An epoxy sculpt addition to a jeweler screwdriver can also work in a pinch. We used to make little support bags with glass beads and stockinette until we saw the support bags that Matt Gay makes. He clued us into using Beanie Baby pellets and going big. These bags are great for holding up objects during fitting. The stockinette is from ProMed. We like to protect objects during the fitting process by using temporary padding. If you stick benchmark suede or felt to a mount and try pulling it off, the adhesive gets to be a mess or it loses its stickiness. Our solution is to stick 3M 415 tape to the adhesive on the padding. This creates easy to remove and reuse temporary padding for mount testing. A little fun thing, a cutting mat with radiating lines. This is so great to have handy for plate mounts. After the blanks are fit at the museum, we return to our shops to sand, prime, paint, and pad our mounts. Sometimes we do this work on-site, but in most cases, it's best done at our shops. Then we return to the museum for a final fit check and to make adjustments and color match. To keep our paint from drying out, we like to use a palette with a lid. Our favorite is Masterson's Stay Wet palette, which comes with special palette paper and a sponge. A paper towel works fine as a sponge replacement. A conservator clued us in to using a little bit of alcohol to keep the palette paper fresh. To avoid toxic fumes, we use Everclear instead of denatured alcohol. It's time to make mount notes for anything that isn't a simple lift to remove. We like to encourage collection managers to check how the object fits on the mount. It's important that they know how an object on a mount should feel when it's comfortable and safe. And then it's time for install. few last thoughts for museums working with contractors. It would be great if museums consulted with Mountmakers when putting together a bid request. Most mount-making RFQs are impressionistic at best. Museums ask for fixed prices for a scope of work that is totally open to interpretation. You need to ask for what you want. Otherwise, you might get a bunch of simple hooks, or you might pay for complicated mounts you don't need. Get to know your mount maker. Not just the company, but the people who will be doing the work. Call their references and say hi. Make sure you know what materials and barriers your mount maker is using. Silicone sheet is kind of amazing, but are you comfortable using it on porous objects? Has anyone done an Audi test? Please give feedback. Every contractor out there wants to do a good job. If something isn't working, we want to know. Thank you for joining us through the process from templating to install. There's one last thing we wanted to close with: the stress and emotional load of doing this work. Mount making draws on an immense amount of creativity, endurance, caution, and attention. In mount making, you will bleed, you will sweat, and you will cry. You will make mistakes and it will eat you up inside. To all the mount makers out there, take care of yourself. And to everyone who works with mount makers, thank you so much for taking the time to understand what we do.
Well, that's fabulous. That was amazing, Jen and Erica. Oh my God. And your your presenter, she was just amazing.
Thanks,
So
Jamie.
I'm going to have to go back and watch that a couple more times. That was really an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. So questions need to be asked, but is Sam doing questions?
Yes, I am.
All
Hi,
right.
Sam. Hello, Sam.
I'm passing it
Hi,
off
how
to
are you? Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome.
Hello, Erica and Jen. That was amazing. Absolutely fabulous. So enjoyable. So many great insights into mount making, and I think just such an educational tool that could really be used across many museum professionals. Absolutely. I was really interested in what you were saying about the lack of formal mount making training, and thought I've got a two-part question for you. So the first one is sort of tell us a little bit about your own experience and training, like how did you come into it, and what have you, how have you developed that sort of expertise over time? And then perhaps you could give us a bit of your thoughts around the solutions for this lack of formal mount making training, and what you think the way forward is.
It's really interesting. Our company, and we also have to say hi to Deanna. She's not with us today. She's our other partner. But we all come from very different backgrounds. My background was working as a structural welder, which I find to be incredibly helpful, when doing this kind of work. Erica was a clockmaker, if you want to talk about that.
I guess just I have experience with precision machining, but not very useful in mounts for the most part.
And then Deanna actually came from being an elevator mechanic. And we all have fine art backgrounds. So we all have sort of, makerly thoughts and feelings and education in our past. But as far as being a mount maker, we've really just, we've learned by doing, and we've taken the technical skills that we have from our past experience and sort of put it into being mount makers. And the forum has been really amazing. We think it's really important to sort of invest in our community, and we see ourselves as an extension of conservation. So we really spend a lot of time looking at other people's mounts, reaching out to our colleagues, really trying to learn. Learning from our mistakes as well, which is always, sort of a thing. But yeah, it's tricky. I mean, as far as the education, it's a conversation that we have all the time. We were both fortunate to work, with good people in the industry in DC. We both worked with Rick Yamato, who some people are familiar with. And so, just sort of being there and apprenticing with people, I think is really the best way to go when you're trying to learn. I think people either have the inclination to do it or they don't. And when you meet people who are Mountmakers, it's, you just click because we're all kind of doing the same thing. So.
Thank you. Amazing. We've got a couple of practical questions. So somebody's asked, Eric has asked, what were the scissors that were featured in the presentation?
Oh.
Yeah, I think Tonic Studios.
Tonic Studios. We actually love them and have multiple pairs of them. So when we first started our company, Erica gave them to Deanna and I as a gift because she had been using them. And everywhere we travel, people see those scissors and get very excited. So they stay very sharp. They're easy to clean. You can find them very easily on the table. So.
Thank you. Excellent. There's another question here that says, what is the range of time it generally takes for a simple brass mount versus an acrylic book mount versus a large complicated mount?
So one of the things I think is really interesting about being a contract mount maker is for us to stay competitive, we have to be very specific about our time. And over, the last decade, we've really figured out the best way to estimate. And so we estimate in 15-minute increments. So a simple brass mount may take 5 minutes to review, 30 minutes to fabricate a blank, 45 minutes to fit it, and then, 10 minutes to finish and fit, and 25 minutes for the installation. So, but every object is different. So we do try and kind of break things down in a like way. We build mounts from really tiny things all the way up to seismic steel mounts that weigh, hundreds and thousands of pounds. And so everything, it all just depends,
Yeah. Yep. So I'm sorry, we've only got 5 minutes for Q&A, so we're going to have to cut it short, but there are opportunities for people to ask you more questions. But I'm going to need to hand back over to Jamie. And again, thank you so much. That was just fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. I'm just blown away by this forum and by that presentation. So thank you, Erica and Jen. Just so good. So now we're moving along. Our next presenters are Jody Hanson, a freelance mount maker from Buffalo, New York, and Nick Pedimonte from the American Museum of Natural History, New York, New York. And they're talking about, their talk is a reimagining, return of the lost ornaments to Robert Adams' table at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And so I'm going to pass this on to them. Take it away, Jody and Nick.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation, A Reimagining, Returning the Lost Ornaments to Robert Adams' Table at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm Jody Hanson, and I'll be joined by conservator Nick Pedimonte. Nick's going to be starting us off with some background about the piece and talk about his work on the conservation treatment.
A virtual hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Nick, and as Jody just said, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the table's history, followed by a quick look at the concept for its conservation treatment, its overall design approach, and its mounting. The subject of our talk is a large council table with a very heavy green marble top. It was designed by Scottish architect Robert Adam in 1765 for the gallery at Croom Court, which is located in Worcestershire, England, and the country seat of George William, the 6th Earl of Coventry. It was carved by Adam's associate, Sephirin Alkin, and painted, quote, 4 times dead stone color, according to surviving bills by its painter, Charles Aylmer. Dead stone color, historically referred to a matte off-white color. There were 2 tables and 2 mirrors made for the gallery, as we see in the historic photograph at left and the underlying drawing by Robert Adam. We can see where they were to be located in the room. As the story goes, eventually in 1948, Croom Court sold the pair of tables to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In 1960, the Met purchased the remaining pair of mirrors, and in 1965, the 2 museums made an exchange, 1 table for 1 mirror, thereby enabling each institution to present the corresponding table and mirror together. When first viewing the table, the space below the apron seems to be missing something. Upon closer examination, we can see there is remaining wood and adhesive covered with layers of finish, clearly suggesting a past applied decorative ornament that has now been lost. Unfortunately, we don't know when the ornaments were lost. We were actually more concerned with what was lost. Luckily, we have an idea. In 1765, Adam had made a design for a table at Scion House, and scholars believe this drawing was the basis for the 2 tables created at Croom Court, partly because he was in contract with both houses. With this design in hand, around 2015-2016, the team at the PMA worked to reinterpret and reproduce the lost ornaments on their sister table. This effort was led by conservator Baru Salimnejad and curator Donna Corbin, and their success greatly informed and inspired our subsequent work at the Met in 2019. The 3 primary sources that we used for designing the new ornament reproductions were 1. Robert Adams' drawing for Scion House. 2. The details already present in Alkin's carving, both on the table's frame as well on its accompanying mirror. And 3. From the skills and virtuosity brought to the project by professional carver Carol Halle, whose interpretations were discussed, reviewed, and approved by Met curators and conservators involved in the project. The drawings served to give us a sense of the ornament's dimensions and the overall balance of design. We looked closely at how Adam used negative space and how the drops and swags related to each other. We then looked closer at Alkin's interpretation of Adam's design on the table itself, noting specifically how Alkin rendered the drops flanking the women's heads, taking note of their profiles and the veining in the leaves. The scroll work was a little more challenging since the table did not contain any comparable designs. We instead looked to the mirror's lower section for reference. The anthemion at center matched closely with the anthemion in Adam's design. A miniature approximation was ultimately what we aimed to achieve in the new ornament.
Here you can see before and after photos of the table with and without the ornaments. This is not a typical mount making application since we were remaking the hanging components and had the ability to build in the latch points or embedded connectors. By approaching the project together from the beginning, we were able to design and prototype, and I think the end result benefited greatly from this exchange of ideas.
Our goal in mounting was to set the ornaments flush against the bottom of the apron, like they had originally been, without seeing the mounts and without attaching anything directly to the table. Echoing Jody, we successfully managed to work through each hurdle to find the best solution through a collaborative effort that both benefited our work and the table. The collaboration was drawn out in a series of steps. First, a thorough measuring and survey of the table's many dimensions was done to determine the total number of ornaments, their placement, and the requisite dimensions. Then we determined the mounting needs for each individual mount. I made this outline for Jody so she knew exactly what type of mount to make for what side and for what ornament. Enlisted here are the abbreviations I used for each mount shape and the list of mounts needed for each section with the corresponding section's frame measurements that she'd be working with. The guide and marshaled list of mounts enabled us to work with a clear vision and mitigated what could have been a fairly confusing system. And through all this, we would create many prototypes to test the mounting logistics and adjust to or improve the designs. Once we thoroughly flushed out the mounting needs in their initial designs, I began work on the ornament production, molding, casting, and preparation as Jody worked to create and install the mounting frame and various custom bracket attachments. As you will see, it became quite an undertaking. This will be a fairly quick how it's made tour of the ornament's reproduction. It began with Carol carving several prototypes that eventually led us to her 3 master ornaments. Here you can see the progression from left to right of the central anthemion, its references, its prototypes, and its final design and execution. She carved each master from basswood, each representing the primary ornaments, the scrollwork, the drop, and the swag. From Carol's 3 wood masters, I would reproduce the requisite 22 ornaments, each cast in epoxy. To do so, a customized box was made to take a mold of Carol's masters. The carvings were taped to the bottom and sealed with wax for easy demolding. A silicone rubber molding material was brush applied to reduce the chance of forming air bubbles against the ornaments. Then the remaining mold material was poured atop. Before each casting, the mold negative was dusted with talc powder to facilitate the cast ornament's removal, and a wire armature was fitted in the mold's negative space to add flexural strength to an otherwise brittle epoxy. We use a 15-minute setting epoxy, mixed and poured into the mold. After about 30 to 45 minutes, the cast would be removed. It was during the casting stage we identified the opportunity for embedding the brackets in the casts. For the swag mounts, each end received either an L bracket or a rod. These custom rods allowed the mount to circumnavigate the original carving or glue block, outlined here in red. For the scroll work, we developed an M-shaped mount, although we didn't start there. At first, I thought we could drill into the cast and attach the mounts where we needed, but I realized this wasn't necessary since we could embed the mounts. One of our early prototypes was embedding 3 small L brackets in the scroll work, but doing so actually created more work for Jody since these 3 would each require a corresponding bracket to attach to, and we didn't need so much adjustability for one ornament. I wanted to anchor the ornament at 3 points without increasing Jody's workload, therefore, our design led us to creating what we called the M bracket, where the 3 attachment points remained embedded, but these were anchored to a flat stock at back and therefore only needed 1 anchoring bracket on the frame's interior. By committing to embedding the mounts, we needed to perfect our designs before I could cast the final ornaments. At this stage, our collaborative effort began in earnest while prototyping the right mount for each ornament. We'd remake those we found ineffective and refined our designs through trial and error until we created the near-perfect match and fit. For those that were good, but needed minor changes, we made those adjustments accordingly. As a treatment note, each final cast ornament was trimmed of excess epoxy. Any final adjustments to the ornament's dimensions were done at this point also, and then the new ornaments were painted to match the table's decorative finish, followed soon after by Jody's installation.
As indicated by the white arrows, there was a small gap between the top of the legs and the underside of the table. This space provided a ledge upon which we could rest a 3/16 inch thick by 1 inch wide strap of metal. I milled the corner connections with a lap joint configuration so the bar rested flush. Initially we started with brass throughout, but found that there was deflection across the longer spans. Some sections were replaced with a stainless steel bar that provided more rigidity. A mylar barrier was slipped between the bars and the table, and polysuede was also used as a barrier for the mounting brackets. It was beneficial to try a few different bracket types by prototyping them. This allowed us to determine the correct thickness of metal to use and different possible types of connections. It was important to create a system that would allow for small and simple adjustments. Without this adjustability, we would have either a standard bracket that was ill-fitting or else upwards of 45 custom brackets. So we designed a mount matrix that offered spatial movement in the X, Y, and Z axis. With each mount bracket, we incorporated up and down range of adjustment by stacking central washers or spacers, and this is indicated by the green arrows. You can see that the connection of the mounting bracket to the brass or steel bar has a spacer that can be stacked to the height necessary. Side-to-side motion was possible through a slot connection, and this is indicated by the red arrows. You can see that I milled a slot that allows us to shift left or right and then tighten the position with a 632 machine screw. A small slot connection was also used for back-to-front shifting, and this is indicated by the yellow. That's a much smaller machine screw. A few of our embedded connectors were rods, and for this bracket receiver, I used a square tube with a small set nut, and this is indicated by the blue. This allowed also for back-to-front adjustment. Each mount component was stamped with a number that corresponded to the table dimension survey. While the pattern basically repeated 9 times, within that sequence, there were many custom bracket details. It was imperative to keep the components labeled for both our sanity as well as to aid future installers. Working together during the trial fitting, each mounting bracket was placed and marked. Then the metal bars were removed in order to drill and tap the connection hole for a 632 machine screw. As you can see from our process photos, I am fortunate to be short enough to sit and work underneath the table. From time to time, it's beneficial to be 5'1". There are a few thoughts we wanted to leave you with at the close of our presentation. Collaboration and brainstorming being a really key part, super helpful for this project. Also, it's unlikely you're going to knock it out of the park on the first try. So the prototyping is key for figuring out your joining methods and thicknesses of metal and how those connectors work. In our case, adding in a great variety of adjustability made the fine-tuning pretty easy.
I agree with Jordy's remarks. I felt that clarifying what the project's goals were at such an early stage allowed us to brainstorm more creatively, and it gave us extra time to prototype as I worked out the casting procedures. It was a truly fruitful collaboration as we actively bounced ideas back and forth until we were all satisfied. It is worth underscoring at this point the value of our expanded circle of collaborators, including my supervisor Mecca Baumeister, who played an important role at every stage, facilitating the project's initiation, overseeing its treatment with always constructive input and a critical eye. Our team of consultants, with Baruz's multiple visits, and the aesthetic, historical, and display perspectives shared from our Met curators Danielle and Wolf. Jody and I were both hired specifically for the British Gallery renovation project, and the Atom Table was one of our main projects among a plethora of other exciting objects and initiatives. In the end, truth be told, we couldn't be more happy with the results as we installed the table and its mirror in the new British Galleries and put on its finishing touches.
It was our pleasure to share this project with you. A number of people helped along the way and deserve recognition for their contributions.
That is amazing. It's so fun to watch each one of these presentations. Thank you, Jody and Nick. Now it's time for questions. We've got a short question and answer period, and I'm going to pass this off to Sam.
Thank you, Jamie. Hi, Jody and Rick. That was amazing. I just can't, Nick, sorry. It's amazing. It's just so great. So good to hear about early collaboration. It's so essential, isn't it? I just think that that's just the key, isn't it, to success? But yeah, I just want to compliment you for a complicated project with incredibly innovative solutions. So well done. We've got a couple of questions here. So the first one is, were the cast pieces rigid, or did you use a semi-rigid material to slightly change the arc radius of the swags?
Nick, are you on?
Oh yeah, I'm here. For the swags, there was some flex in it. They had a wire embedded in them, so I could adjust it. So even if the cast itself was just quite brittle, if it snapped or broke, it would still hold itself together. So there was 3 essentially dimensions that the cast swags needed to fit into. We had Carol carve essentially the middle or the larger dimension, and I was able to adjust the size of the swags. So luckily they were brittle, so that's why we needed the wire input, but they were also adjustable because of that. So we were able to sort of change the dimensions and then install them accordingly.
Thanks, Nick. The next question is, why did you choose to cast the final product in epoxy, and were there other materials you had considered?
We were taking our lead essentially from Baruz's work at the PMA. He had done a lot of testing on all of the epoxies, and he found the greatest success using the Alumilite system. And so rather than reinventing the wheel, we essentially adopted his methodology. Another alternative could have been carving all of them, which of course, there's the challenge of, the wood itself was extremely brittle. So Carol's carving masters had snapped and broken multiple times. So we knew that wasn't going to be a possibility. And so I think the epoxy also had a pretty good color match. So it wasn't so challenging or difficult to match the colors to the table itself. Because I think all the working properties, the use of the materials, the embedding the wire, I think all of that kind of suited our purposes and our needs. And maybe if we had more time we could have tested things ourselves, but that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yep, no, a great solution. There's another question here from Jason that says, were the metal bars resting on top of the legs on the interior of the table?
Yes, there was a slot there, and I don't know why the table was fabricated that way, but they were able to fit into that space between the very top of the legs and the underside of the stone. It fit this natural 3/16 inch space with a little bit of the barrier a tolerance as well. So they just rest.
Great, thank you. And I've got a question for you. Because it was just so complicated, do you want to both talk about what was the greatest challenge for you and how did you overcome it?
Oh, gosh.
If there was just one that you could pick.
Well, I think one of our struggles was just the material thickness. You know, as Mountmakers, we're always trying to make everything as thin and unnoticeable as possible. And so, you know, I had a couple different brackets that were a lighter weight brass, and you know, those didn't work out for us. They didn't offer the rigidity that we needed. We wanted them to be a little movable in case somebody bumped into them, they wouldn't break off. But we didn't want them to be so, you know, so it's a balance of rigid, not too rigid.
Yep. And what about for you, Nick? Was there anything in particular?
For me, it was sort of the figuring out how we're gonna have all of the ornaments flush against the bottom, and I think the solution came about from when Jody and I were essentially sort of figuring out how to do that. And I think once we did the embedding, which made sense once we actually started, you know, doing the work, that definitely solved that issue. But I didn't want there to be too much mounting if that was possible. But then we ended up trying to minimize it as much as possible. But I think it was to get the aesthetic that we wanted to achieve. It required this level of customization, and the product is, you know, what we ended up with.
And if I could also add, we were working on a lot of other things at the same time. So it's not like we were like totally just on this project. I mean, there were so many other parts of the British Gallery project that that, you know, you're bouncing back and forth all the time, like with so many installations.
It was kind of good. It was kind of good that it worked out that way, because we could sort of take, you know, sort of mental breaks and come back to it and keep revising it. And we worked on it over maybe the course of about a year.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you both. We've run out of time, but yeah, thank you both and congratulations. I'm going to hand back over to Jamie. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you, Sam, for taking care of the questions. Thank you, Jody and Nick. It was so cool to see that. I love the bringing together of conservation and mount making to do that kind of, you know, a repair, a presentation, bringing something back up to where people can really understand it. So now we're going to move along to Brett Angel from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, Massachusetts, USA. And here we're going even a little further in this with the fact that mount making can be a piece of theater. And this is time for his presentation, The Chair That Wouldn't Fall Over. So take it away, Brett.
I'm Brett Angel, and I'm the Senior Exhibitions Preparator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I'm going to be speaking on one small portion of a very complicated exhibition called Casanova. I'll be focusing on the mount I designed and made for the chair that wouldn't fall over. We often talk about mounts for earthquake mitigation, vibration, safety, and security, but we seldom talk about mounts for theatrics. So I thought it would be a fun little change up for a truly unique exhibition. Casanova was essentially the brainchild of C.D. Dickerson, formerly of the Kimball in Fort Worth, now at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. He created the original proposal and checklist. The MFA has substantial holdings of decorative arts, furniture, accessories, clothing, and costumes, and so we essentially became a partner. This exhibition traveled to the Kimball first, then the Legion of Honor in San Francisco, and finally the MFA in Boston, and this happened between 2017 and 2018. In addition to C.D. Dickerson, there was also a revolving cast of curators that came and went for various reasons during the planning stages of this exhibition. They include George Shackelford, Frederick Ilkman, Esther Bell, Tom Mickey, Pam Parmel, and Courtney Harris. The exhibition focused on the exploits of Giacomo Casanova through artwork and art holdings. There were essentially three scenes that the exhibition was designed around. I'm focusing on the London card-playing scene. The player is caught cheating, and the opponent has leapt up in protest. Because of the complicated nature of the scenes, the designer and curators thought it would be best to use live volunteers to stage each scene. This way, specific poses, mannequin types needed, furniture, costumes, and accessories could all be determined rather simply. This is definitely the first time I've ever had living props for a mock-up, so it was quite a unique experience for me. These were the poses that were eventually agreed upon. You can see on the right the chair in question, which is what we're talking about here. You also notice Frederick's hand holding the chair as if it were tipping over. This is where the idea of the chair tipping over began. Frederick asked if we might be able to make something that could support the chair in a frozen position of tipping over. I said, yeah, sure, and so it began. The chair itself is English from about 1755 to 1765. It's made of mahogany and beech, and the upholstery on the slip seat is modern, so this was an ideal candidate. The mount itself is actually quite simple because the weight of the chair is essentially being supported on the floor. The mount just has to hold the chair back at the desired angle. So here you see the design I came up with. The mount could be made of brass because it wouldn't be supporting a ton of weight. You can see the large floor plate gets screwed into the deck, which would be plywood at all the venues. From the plate, the main support runs up the front side of the back leg of the chair. From there, a smaller support runs under the chair rail. Here you see the mount and chair together, mocked up in the shop. I've circled the capture clip. This is mechanically attached to the support under the chair rail. The clamp's around the rail, locking it onto the mount itself. All of this fussiness is away from the viewer's sight and in the back. One venue was in San Francisco, so it's critical to have some type of earthquake-resistant mount. There was one small quake while the exhibition was installed, and I'm happy to say that everything, including the chair, fared very well. Here you have another view from the viewer's vantage point. Again, mocked up in the shop. You can see the large mock-up board that we used. Here's one more view. As you can see, even before the mount got painted, it's more or less naturally hidden by the design of the chair itself. In retrospect, it would have been wise for me to put a second lockdown clip on the front position of the mount too. That would have put much less stress on the object as the chair twists and turns in an earthquake, but it can be easily modified if the mount were to be used again for another exhibition. This is a shot of the installation at the Kimball, which was the first venue. It's still not completely finished here. You can see a protective cloth underneath the female mannequin, and also the poses of the male mannequins were adjusted slightly to help animate them a little bit more. This is a shot of the installation at the Legion of Honor. It's essentially the same design, the same background, the same arrangement of materials. The only difference really here is that the floor is now dark gray instead of light. And this is the installation at the MFA in Boston. The two windows are actually LED screens showing rain dripping down as if it's raining outside. So quite appropriate for London. There's also a screen in the fireplace, which is hard to see in this image, with animated fire as well. And then also we had audio of the card players arguing with each other. So there's been some criticism about these editions as being kind of over the top, and while it may or may not be, it was certainly fun to work on this exhibition with all these unusual ideas.
Thank you, Brett. That was fabulous. So let's get on to some questions. I'm going to pass this along to Samantha.
Thank you. Hi, Brett. That was fantastic. I absolutely love the theatrics and the living props. That was just fabulous.
It's very unusual for me as well.
Yeah. Do you want to talk to us a little bit more about that process? I think, like from a Mountmaker's perspective, working in that way is quite different. Do you want to give us some more insight about that?
I think Keith Crippen, our designer, and Frederick Ilkman, who was our main curator at the MFA for this project, I think were trying to decide how would we envision this complicated process with all these multiple figures and multiple things going on in each scene. And so I can't recall which person exactly came up with the idea, but together they decided, why don't we just use some of our volunteers and interns in the office? And of course they were thrilled to be able to participate. And it really just helped us to focus our ideas, like I said, not only for the poses, but what kind of accessories might be needed, what kind of decorative objects could be added into the scene as well. And in one of the other scenes, they even, which we didn't talk about here, but in one of the, I believe it was the Italian scene, they even had a kind of a huge skirt mocked up on one of the volunteers too, just so we could get an idea of the girth as she was in the space, so that we could decide where the furniture was going to be arranged. So it was pretty complicated. And so I think that having the actual live people being the stand-ins was really beneficial.
Yeah, I think it's just incredible. And from your perspective, were there any sort of frustrations or challenges, I guess, around that, rather than sort of normally a static object that you might be presented with, this kind of backwards and forwards? Was there any sort of challenges there for you?
The chair itself actually was quite a simple design, and the idea was pretty simple, again, because luckily the chair itself, the weight of it was being supported by the floor. So that part was pretty easy. Some of the other parts that we're not talking about here, which would be an idea for a whole nother talk, but a lot of the mannequins, I don't know if you noticed, but have really extreme moves. So some of the arms are pushed up really close to each other. The mannequin over the table that had raised up, that was tipping the chair over, was bent over the table. And as you probably know, mannequins aren't made that way. So the mannequins actually had to be chopped apart. This again came from the process of having the live volunteers and the mock-ups. And so we were able to decide which mannequins needed to be cut apart. And then we used a contractor, Gerk Manninen, who works out of Cape Natick, Maine, and together we designed a steel armature system in the joints that would be adjustable. And so wherever those parts were cut apart, we're able to add those articulated joints and then be able to lock them down once they're in the desired position. So that was really the most complicated part, which of course no one would ever see.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so do you think were there any, as because it traveled around, were there challenges related to the mannequins or the mount or anything along the way?
No, after you get that first one, the most difficult installation is always the first one. So at the Fort Worth Museum, the Kimball in Fort Worth was probably the most difficult, just because it's your first time. And while everything was mocked up ahead of time, when you're doing the first final installation, everything needs to be perfect and just so. And so the first installation was just difficult only because of that. And then each progressive exhibition after that got easier. So the Legion of Honor was a little bit quicker, a little bit easier, even though that was our earthquake zone. And then when it came to Boston, we pretty much were pros by then.
Amazing. Just to sort of wrap it up, are there any sort of tips and tricks out there for fellow Mountmakers and allied professionals around this project?
I think the biggest tip, especially for objects that are going in traveling exhibitions, are to have that flexibility. So I had mentioned the articulated moving joints and the mannequins. Those were all so that when we were at each venue, the curators and designers at each of those different institutions had a little bit of flexibility about how they wanted to arrange things, so they would have the opportunity to change the poses slightly. And so flexibility is always the key. If you can make a mount that's flexible, you just make it so much easier on yourself during the installation process.
Thank you so much, Brett. That was awesome, and congratulations.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
I'm going to hand back over to Jamie.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Brett. That was what a cool installation. I'm just blown away by it. So now we're going to move along again. And our next presenter is Laura McClure of the Smithsonian Institution, National Museum of American History, Washington, D.C., USA. And she's going to talk about buttons and magnets, a Mountmaker's journey. We're moving into our magnets section, and I'm really looking forward to it. All right, Laura, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Laura McClure, and I am the Mountmaker at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. I love my job. Our museum collects artifacts of all kinds, from gowns to locomotives, to preserve the American people an enduring record of their past. We have more than 1.7 million objects and 22,000 linear feet of archival documents in our collection. Today, I'm going to be talking about a kind of object we use all the time in our exhibitions, buttons. Welcome to Buttons and Magnets, a Mountmaker's Journey. I'd like to dedicate this talk to Michael Faraday. In 1831, he discovered that when you change a magnet field, you can create an electric current. He knew magnets were cool. At the National Museum of American History, we exhibit many buttons. Button, button. Who's got the button? We do. We have all the buttons. Over the years, we've tried a number of methods for pin mounts. Velcro and blue board, acrylic L-pins, brass L-pins, brass armatures, steel pins, pinning the pin directly onto fabric. We have several galleries that rotate every year, so I'm looking for ways to streamline mounts for object types that we use frequently. We needed a mount solution that addresses the following. 1. Flexibility. Allows designers and curators the freedom to easily move buttons to whatever configuration they desire. 2. One fix for them all. Can be used for most pins without damaging the artifact. 3. Mass production. Enables assembly line production of mounts. 4. Design. Button will sit slightly proud of the substrate. Buttons can sometimes get lost when used around text and/or graphics. So how do we emphasize them? Research. My first stop was our amazing conservation department at NMAH. We discussed possible ideas, risks, and materials, and created a tentative game plan. 2. Gwen Spicer. I emailed Gwen and asked her about what type of magnet would be best for this use. I used the following materials for these mounts. Polytex poly webbing. It's strong, it's inert, it's easy to cut with scissors. A hot glue gun. It's inert, it's clear, it's fun. It's okay to use hot glue with ceramic magnets. Ceramic ferrite disc magnets. A weaker type of magnet to reduce some of the magnetic field exposed to the button. Steel sign blank. A must for this project because the magnets need a place to stick while you are assembling them. Baby belt sander. Hot glue is great because it's inert, but it's easy for it to be uneven. A belt sander helps flatten any uneven spots. Also, a Sharpie. Everyone loves a Sharpie. Assembly. 1. Use a template to cut out poly webbing. My template is about 40 millimeters by 12 millimeters to accommodate my particular magnets. 2. Mark magnets to show which is the north or negative side. This is the time to use that steel sign blank to lay out a bunch of magnets. 3. Place a dot of hot glue on the magnet and attach poly webbing. Quickly squish the magnet down evenly on the sign blank and poly webbing. The first image on the left is the squish down magnet and poly webbing. Step 4, repeat with the second magnet on the other end of the webbing. 5, add a second small piece of webbing to the first magnet on the top. Step 6, trim the webbing. It doesn't have to be perfect, just remove a little bit of the excess. Step 7, place the mount on your pin with the small piece of webbing against the pin. Step 8, place the magnets together so they can get to know each other. Step 9, check to see if the whole thing sits flat. If not, use your belt sander to gently flatten. This one is perfecto. Step 10, bask in the glory knowing you did it. Good job! Here are some images of the button mounts in action. Everyone is happy. During install, you can have all the buttons and magnet mounts on sign blank ready to go, and the designers and curators can take their time placing for optimal awesomeness. You are free to move to another part of the gallery and install plate mounts. Thank you for listening and watching my talk. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Also, a huge thank you to Veronica Mercado, who made the vast majority of the first batch of these mounts. She is a rock star. Also, Janice Ellis, our senior paper conservator at American History, who always believes it can be done.
Oh, mighty fine. Way to go, Laura. The magnets are so cool. So now, are there any questions for Laura, or can she just talk about her cats? I'll let Sam decide that.
Hey, Laura, that was fabulous.
Hi, Sam.
I loved it. And I love that you love your job, and I love it too. Such a great solution. And of course, we want to hear about your cats, but let's talk about the project first.
Down to business.
I'd like to know what your favourite button was. Seeing there were so many buttons, was there a favourite, or were there multiples?
There have been so many buttons, and actually buttons are really fun to work with. We had some really fun buttons that we worked with our Stonewall exhibit that went up last year, or maybe it was the year before. Time has no meaning. But there were some really great buttons for that. And one of the buttons I used on my slide was the Christopher Street button. And that one was a great button. But we have so many buttons. They're a great object because they're small and they say so much, and they talk, it's like material culture and all the things. I'm not a curator, but I like to mount buttons.
Yeah, no, they're super cool. They're very poignant, aren't they, for a point in history?
Yeah.
You know, I love what they say. So Steve's got a question which says, how easy is it to separate the magnets and remove the object?
Oh, it's super duper easy. Because I'm using the ceramic magnets, there's very little pull and push on it. So it's very easy. And you just kind of open up the back of the button and then you just slide the mount right in, and then it's super easy and it's totally reversible. I mean, nothing is attached to the button itself.
Thank you. Julian's got a question that says, did this require all the graphics to be printed on a steel sign blank? At what point in the process was this decision made?
So that's a great question. We did use steel sign blank, but we printed all of the labels on vinyl, and I work in the production shop of my museum. And so early on in the process, I told everyone, I want to try to use magnets for this, y'all. And so we switched from aluminum to steel sign blank, which steel is a little bit trickier to work with for sign blank, but our cabinet shop is amazing, and they try to help me every time they can because I need a lot of help.
The next question is from Mary, and Mary says, what size is a baby belt sander and what's the brand?
Oh, I love my baby belt sander so much. So I wish I had, it's in my mount shop. It's probably this big. It's pretty small. I got that one from Rio Grande, which is a jewelry maker, but it's now available on Auto Fray, which I think is also a jewelry maker supply. It's wonderful. And you hook it up to your forward on flex shaft Dremel, and it just goes and goes and goes. It's super easy to change the belts on it. You can get different grits. I have one right next to on my workbench, and I do a lot of fine detail work with that. And then I have my big belt sander for like taking off a lot of material. But this is great. It's great for pin mounts. It's great for the magnets. It's super handy. And it's tiny and little and adorable.
Awesome. We'll need to see a photo of it sometime. You'll need to post one, hey?
I love it.
I'm really interested in how you did that problem solving when you were talking about, you know, your focus around flexibility and mass production. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that thinking and why that was necessary?
Yes. So we do a lot of rotations in our museum. And so I wanted to have the flexibility to be able to move out and move in new buttons, and also the flexibility to be able to just let our designers have free reign. And so it's really nice because the designers and the curators can sit down and just kind of play around with the buttons, and it's so easy to just move them around. And that way I can also reuse those mounts when they come off of display. So it's a twofer, and everyone wins and everyone's happy.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant solution. So that's all the questions, Laura. Thank you so much. Do you want to quickly talk about your cats?
Sure. They were here earlier, but they left because they've seen the presentation several times in grades.
Thank you so much. And I'll hand back over to Jamie. Bye.
Okay, yeah, you've got smart cats there. Thank you, Laura. Oh my God, that was just so cool. Really enjoyed that. So now we are moving ahead. Our next presenters are Gwen Spicer of Spicer Art Conservation LLC, USA, and Yadin Larasheta of TrueView USA. and they'll be speaking on looking at magnetic cleaning pads for exhibit display cases. And I'm really looking forward to this because Gwen, as Laura mentioned, is the magnet lady and literally wrote the book on magnets in magnetic mounting systems for museums and cultural institutions. It's worth it. Buy this book. I've been using it. All right, handing it off to Gwen and Yadin.
Looking at magnetic cleaning tools for exhibit display cases. What are these cleaning devices? They contain two components allowing for both sides of a glazing to be cleaned simultaneously via access to only one side. These tools could help clean display cases, especially hard to reach areas. The success of the tool is the matching of the magnet's strength with the thickness of the glazing.
The use of magnets to clean windows is not a new idea. The patent drawing on the left using electromagnets is from the 1920s. Alnico magnets, an iron alloy with aluminum, nickel, and cobalt, were the first permanent magnets and were not developed until the 1935. The stronger ferroboron Alnico didn't enter the market until 1949. The patent drawing on the right is from 1950, only 2 years later.
Today, two types of magnets are used for these cleaning devices, Alnico and neodymium. It's important to know which type is in the cleaning apparatus for proper storage. Neodymium magnets can damage electronic devices, such as cell phones, and will demagnetize Alnico magnets. For details on magnet types and how they work, check out Gwen's book, Magnetic Mounting Systems for Museums and Cultural Institutions.
Two kinds of magnetic cleaning devices are readily available, one designed for aquariums and one for windows. Prices range anywhere from $7 to $125, depending on size and if the magnetic force is adjustable. The knobs on the window cleaner on the right move the magnets closer to or further away from the device surface, which in turn strengthens or weakens the magnet's full force. Adjustable devices seem to be exclusive to ones designed for windows and not for aquariums.
Devices for windows are available in all sorts of sizes and shapes, and usually include a security rope on the part used on the window exterior. The main difference between tools designed for windows and the ones designed for aquariums is that those for windows tend to include blades like windshield wipers or squeegees.
These blades are great for moving liquid across the glazing surface, but are not necessary for the type of cleaning usually conducted within a museum setting.
In order to accommodate space for these blades to move back and forth and for liquid to move freely, there are bumps on the magnet housing that raise the device away from the glazing surface.
Devices designed for aquariums, on the other hand, do not need to accommodate blades and have an overall even surface. This allows for consistent contact with the glazing and no pressure points. The surfaces of each of the two components is different. One surface is designed to scrape algae off the aquarium's interior. It's similar to the hook side of hook and loop fasteners like Velcro. The surface of the matching component that's designed for the aquarium's exterior is much softer and fuzzy in texture, similar to velvet.
To avoid scratching the glass or acrylic, cleaning cloths need to be placed over the surface of each component.
The aquarium cleaners, like the window cleaners, are available in a variety of sizes, and each size is designed for different glazing thicknesses. If we look at one brand for the sake of comparison, and we're not recommending this brand over any other, we can see that the small size is designed for 5 mil thickness, the medium for 10, and the large for 16 millimeter thickness.
Based on the experiments we've been doing, we're liking the aquarium cleaners over the window cleaners, used in conjunction with microfiber cloths. We've been doing tests with 2 types of 100 cloths, one with an ultra suede type texture and another very plush loop weave. The varying thicknesses of the 2 cloths, testing the strength of the larger 2 components.
These devices might make it easier to clean a display case where it's difficult to access the inside, but precautions must be taken. However, as the magnets in the device could break the glass of the magnetic pull force is too strong, and they could affect some artifacts. These cleaning devices should not be used near clocks, compasses, and electronics, including monitors displaying video art and other types of time-based media.
Other concerns involve the safety of the objects in the exhibit cases, as there is a risk of mechanical damage if the device falls. One thought is to cover the device in batting and fabric, like a pillow of sorts, to buffer any potential contact. Let us know if you think of any other concerns we should be looking at as we continue to explore the potential use of these devices. And all input is welcome.
We really appreciate everyone listed here for thinking, inspiring us to look into these devices.
So thank you all for listening, and we're here to answer any questions that might come up. And here's our contact information down below if you'd like to email us after.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Gwen and Yadin. I love, this is such a typical Mountmaker sort of thing of looking to other disciplines, other sources, the industrial realm, pet supply, all this stuff for the sorts of things that we're going to use. So let's get to the questions. I'm passing this off to Samantha.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Gwen and Yadin. That was just absolutely fantastic. I guess I'd like to understand how this solution sort of came about. Were you approached by a client, or did this just sort of come about, Gwen, perhaps as you're doing research into your book, or where did this thinking come from?
Actually, Yadin, are you there? Actually, it was on a listserv that Yadin passed on. I don't actually remember how it.
Sorry, I got disconnected for a second. How we came across these the first time?
Yeah.
There was an article. Well, actually, no. Initially, it was from an article that was published by conservators at the Royal Ontario Museum in conjunction with CCI, and they were looking at fogging in display cases. And towards the end of that article, they mentioned that they were looking into using these. But when I reached out to them, they're like, we never got a chance to actually use them. We thought it might be a good idea, but we hadn't looked at them too far. So that's where we got kind of inspired to look at them a little closer.
It's fantastic because, cleaning the insides of cases and all that fogging is such an issue for all of us. So it's so great that this work is happening. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your testing? Talk to us maybe perhaps a little bit more about the magnet strength and, some of the things that you brought up. Is there an opportunity here to just flesh some of that out a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think Gwen and I just basically played around with them via Zoom, and I sent her several samples of different true view glazing and thicknesses, both in acrylic and glass, so that she could take a look at them. And I did the same on my end, and then we just sort of were so aligned, and then we did our individual experiments, and then we were just so aligned on our thoughts on them. I mean, once you start working with them, you realize, the pros and cons between the window cleaner versus the aquarium cleaner. And I think for Gwen, it was really helpful for me to get her input on the actual magnets and how, and there's a lot of, actually, we try to make this brief, but she did a lot of research on the orientation and types of magnets that are being used in the components, which, will affect its strength. So she took them apart. I think there's a whole article there that Gwen can write on these.
Absolutely. Gwen, do you want to add anything there?
No, I think that in some respects, this was preparing for this meeting. We got to a certain level, and that we're going to still continue that to really see the effectiveness on, and the different designs and brands on, whether, like with this aquarium, there's 2 magnets, and that maybe is useful in some cases versus sort of the smaller one, where maybe it's more touch-up kinds of things. So this is kind of just a taste, and we'd like to hear more from you all in order to sort of, more of one direction or another.
Yeah, fantastic. It'd be great to understand what people's needs are, I guess, and then absolutely try to solve to those. There's a question here from Jeanette, and she's saying, could you please review which cleaning cloths worked best? We couldn't quite hear that bit in the presentation.
Yeah, well, Gwen and I are both, oh, there they are. Awesome. Being textile conservators, I think we tend to geek out on the cloths quite a bit. And one of the things that we've been finding is that the ones that are 100% polyester versus having any polyamide or nylon mix in there are much softer. They're less likely to scratch the acrylic surface. So we just really stuck to 100% polyester. And I can send somehow the ones we use. One is the one that's the ultra suede fabric is, oh, I don't remember. Yeah, that one's the American Recorder. Right. That is that you can purchase it through American Recorder. And then the other one is from McMaster-Carr. Oh, there you have it. Yeah. So it's used for all sorts of materials. And then the other super plushy one, which is thanks to the Getty, his name is escaping me, but he's a framing conservator at the Getty. It's his favorite cloth. It's very, very plush. It's got a high pile and it's from McMaster-Carr.
Perfect for a baby,
It's kind of creepy how plushy it is. It's kind of, yeah.
Thank you.
But the reason why we chose those 2 is because one has kind of a thicker, it's thicker, so it'll offer more distance from the 2 magnet components versus the thinner one. So using them in a combination could be an option. We haven't gotten that far.
Yeah, no, it's incredible research, and I look forward to hearing more. There's another question here from Andy, and he's saying, if the magnet on the outside is lifted from the surface of the glass, will the inside part fall?
Yes, absolutely, which is a big concern. Yeah, so you have to be really careful not to pull it away until you're down at the bottom of the case, as an option. And I know, I mean, the window ones have, yeah, go on.
Because these are designed for apartments, and I think they're mostly used in Asia. It seemed that the nicer ones with the sturdiest plastic, the length of time of delivery was really long. and but and it's a safety cord so that then if for some reason it drops, it doesn't hit the person, 50 floors below.
Yeah. There's another question here about what is the largest size available of these cleaners?
Oh, well, there's this size. Dean had the one that was the variable, but
the same size. Yeah.
This has neodymium magnets, whereas these have the Alnico. But I did get this one. But I ruled it out pretty instantly because it has this button to draw the magnet closer, and it's not a dial, it's just a clunk, and that wouldn't be successful at all. I don't know if I can get it.
Yeah, and that's where the price range kind of really gets higher, is if you're looking for the larger that has the adjustable magnet force. That one was like the one that the one that was in the picture, that was a bigger one with the green knobs. It was about $125.
Yeah,
like that one, but with the adjustable. Yeah,
and this was like 20. So that gives you kind of an idea of the.
Yeah. Thank you. We've run out of time, but there's a few more questions, and I'm sure people will be able to reach out to you either directly or, at other opportunities. I'm going to hand back over to Jamie, but yes, thank you both again so much. Great project.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Gwen and Yadine. It's amazing how magnets have changed so much about mount making. I'm using them, but I must say I run into a situation where here in this shop, we use both steel and we use brass. And so contamination of magnets is with steel shavings and possible rust is a very real concern. So it's all sorts of things like that we're going to have to think about. And that's probably a great segue into the panel discussion that we've got coming up, where it's going to be a panel discussion on magnets, safety, storage, handling, tools, and coatings. Panelists are Gwen Spicer, Spicer Art Conservation, Pierre-Luc Brouillet, I'm sure I butchered that, from the Musée National des Beaux-Arts du Québec, Quebec, Canada, and Laura McClure from the National Museum of American History, Washington, D.C., USA. And so let's go and talk about magnets.
Hello, and welcome to our panel discussion on magnets. I'm happy to introduce our panel, Gwen Spicer.
Hello, I'm pleased to be here.
Pierre-Luc Brouillet. And myself, Laura McClure. Hello. We'll begin our discussion today with safety. Rare earth magnets must be handled with safety in mind, so please make sure you handle with care and use the proper safety equipment.
To safely handle strong magnets, you need to wear goggles and gloves. Goggles are very important because magnets tend to shatter if they are put together accidentally. It's also important to wear gloves. For example, if your hand gets stuck between two strong magnets, gloves will help you to pull off your hands and reduce the risk of injuries.
Next, we'll talk about the storage of magnets. Storing magnets can be challenging. And Gwen is now going to talk about the challenges of storing magnets.
Yeah, this is is really based on that each permanent magnet has their own requirements. And each need to be stored independently, and then by size and grade. It turns out that each type of permanent magnet affects another type as well. This is especially true with the neodymium, which can easily demagnetize both the ferrite and alnico magnet types. Also, it is the stronger neodymium that benefits most from having a separator. The separator reduces the accumulated strength of the full group of magnets within a stack. Any material can be used between magnets. Scraps of cardboard, foam, or even lengths of twill tape. Seen here in the upper right portion of the slide, a solution from the National Museum of American Indian. I also like small boxes. They're really great as that they can be labeled with the necessary information like grade and size. And for a specific project, contact lenses cases were really perfect. However, I find that metal boxes, which is what I use now, has two main advantages. One, the magnets actually stay in place, preventing any mechanical shock, but also the cumulative flux is more concentrated. What I have described are magnets that we actually use, which might be a one-time use. But what about magnets that are part of a many-venue traveling exhibit? In this case, their storage is particularly critical. If these magnets are knocked or dropped during installation or de-installation, their pull force will gradually reduce. And thus, the last venue, the success of that mount actually might be in jeopardy.
Now we'll talk about the handling of rare earth magnets.
An important part of handling is temperature. And each permanent magnet has a Curie temperature, or seen in this diagram, the TC. And that identifies the temperature at which the material magnetism will be eliminated. Another temperature threshold is the maximum operating temperature, and that's seen here as the TMAX. And this is the temperature at which a magnet will still maintain its magnetic strength without diminishing its power. Always be sure to stay below the magnet's maximum operating temperature. And the neodymium in particular is very sensitive to this, to both the Curie and the maximum operating temperature.
We are going to show you some useful tools that make handling magnets much easier. When possible, use plastic, aluminum, or wooden tools. Here are some examples that you can use with magnets. Here are some more examples of tools that are very useful to use with magnets. And this is an image of some of Pierre-Luc's favorite tools.
Yes, those tools, I use those tools to work with very strong magnets. In my case, on a project, I needed to work with N52 magnets. So I needed to have, first of all, a polar detector to know on which side of the magnets I am working. after I used the magnet puller that you can see with the orange handle. This tool is very useful to separate correctly magnets one by one. After that, I also use some Teflon wedge, which I designed to smoothly slide magnets in place. It's also possible to make a wooden wedge to make that kind of operation, but with Teflon, it's much easier, and it's easier to clean between each use. I also totally love my sliced ceramic scissors, which are non-magnetic. So if you need to put some interface and cut them on place or cutting around magnets, it's wildly easier to use those tools. You will see a little video where I am handling magnets with all this bunch of tools.
Another great use for Teflon. Our next slide is about coatings and why coatings are so important on neodymium magnets.
It turns out the element neodymium is very reactive to oxidation, leading to complete loss of its strength. Therefore, the coating that surrounds this magnet is particularly critical to its function. It just so happens that most of the possible coatings are all also archival. And even this standard 3-layered plating, as seen in this graphic, the nickel, copper, nickel, that is the most popular. There are other types like plastic and rubber, which the rubber is probably not archival. Other types are also just as good, as I said, but I do recommend checking out the K&J Magnetics video where they tested several coating types in salt water for a span of a week or so.
Finally, here's a list of suppliers that we really like to buy magnets and magnets related supplies. And this list will also be available on the IMF website after the presentation. So now I'd like to open it up so we can have a little discussion about magnets. Pierre-Luc, do you have any questions for Gwen?
Yes. About all the storage example that you showed up. You know, the small metal box. Is there a limit of magnetic power of a neodymium magnets to store it inside a metal box? Because if I look at the N52 I was handling in the video, those will be complicated to fit inside a metal box.
Mhm.
So
Right.
what would you recommend to store those kind of strong magnets?
So the gauge of the metal is critical
Mhm.
to the strength of any particular magnet or group of magnets that are used. Probably the most efficient metal that for your particular case would be mu metal, I believe it's called, but it's particularly on it is a metal that is specifically designed to capture and retain a magnetic flux. You actually have it in many of different electronics, like your computer, where there are magnets and they want to make sure that one use of a magnet within the computer doesn't affect what's going
Yeah.
on with another electronics sort of thing. So that would be something if you need a tighter space
Mhm.
around, but just adding a gap like you do in the sense that you have several inches surrounding or more surrounding your group of magnets, that is really the most economical.
I just for those magnets, I just keep them inside the shipping box I received with the magnets, which was nicely built. It was inside. It was a foam layer surrounded by galvanized steel layers, and then after inside a cardboard box.
Mhm.
But I was wondering because I think the foam thickness and the metal sheet thickness has an incidence on how the box is functional for storing those magnets.
Right, and really the Altoid boxes, I have groups of smaller
Mhm.
magnets, and then also that you might order a large quantity for a particular project, but then you still have a few left over, and so that's kind of when those boxes are particularly useful, so that I can separate each by shape. So I have a group of boxes just for discs, a group for blocks, and a group for cylinder, where it's a tall disc.
Yeah.
And then by grade and sizes, so that each box has its own particular. And so then I can quickly go, oh, do I have enough of this particular size for this project? And I can go yes or no, or, but you actually, in mentioning the box that you're using, being that it was what was shipped in, is really brings up sort of another topic, in the sense that most magnets are shipped or delivered to us using ground transportation. And so then they just need to make sure that the box is large enough, and typically they ensure that the group is in the center of the box. And this is also important for air transportation, and this, not that your order of magnets is going to come by air, but you might be transporting a mount or an artifact that is mounted with magnets. And so then you have to ensure that your mount and its crate and all um, follow the regulations of air travel, because in essence, especially these strong neodymium magnets, they see them as hazardous materials.
Yeah. I made a few tests with a different interface between magnets and different materials, and I found that each time I'm using an interface or a barrier, I have a loss of the pull force. Particularly when I use polysued polyethylene on a magnet to make a barrier between, for example, once I had to install a giant roll of paper on the wall, on a wall mount presentation, and we install it with magnets. And I use the same kind of N52 magnets I have right now, but I put some layers of sued poly, and I found that I had a loss. Each time I had a layer, I have a loss on the pull force of the magnet.
Yeah, no, that space, is the field distance, or sometimes called the gap, or and yes, as the gap increases the pull force, and depending on the size and the grade, that field distance changes. However, I think am I understanding that you use poly suede, like a poly? So it turns out with pressure, there is another phenomenon that actually happens. And this came out in a workshop that I did several years ago. I think it was 2013 or 15, and where people were given different materials and found that the thicker poly suede had the same holding power as the control with nothing. So then what was going on? Well, it turns out there's another phenomenon of exchange of electrons, and that is shown in the triboelectric series. Where in essence, materials are ranked by the ability to give or receive electrons. And if you have a material that are far apart, your artifact is one material and you're using a material as your barrier or material between the magnet, that actually can enhance the pull force or contributes in additional strength of the magnet.
Yeah.
So in fact, the interaction of materials is also contributing to the strength of the pull force of the magnet, which I find very exciting and interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
And more needs to really be researched about that.
Exactly. On another example of this, if you are mounting some magnets on a steel plate, on a 1/8 of a hinge steel plate, the magnets will double their pull force. And this is an awesome phenomenon that I'm not really sure to understand, but I think there's a relationship between the magnetic field and the pull force, because if you have your 1/8, correct me if I'm not right, because these are my thoughts. If I have the magnetic shield like this, and then I put a rarer magnet on it, the thickness, if over a certain thickness, the magnetic field will be content between this space. So to go from the north to the south pole, they're going to, you know, they are closer than when on the magnet it needs to turn around the magnet to go back to the south pole. So do you think this might be an explication on why when mounted on a steel plate, the pull force is improved?
So,
That's not an easy question.
No. A magnet in itself, on its own, is just an inanimate object. It doesn't. It just sits there. What a magnet needs to show its unique abilities or behavior is either a ferromagnetic material like iron or steel, or a second magnet. So as a two-part system, whether you use a magnet with a magnet or a magnet with a ferromagnetic material, they basically have the same strength. Now, if you add a second ferromagnetic material with a magnet and a ferromagnetic material, I call that a three-part system. And yes, it doubles mostly its strength. You can also do the same. There are different variations of those three parts, but yes, a three-part magnetic system has more, doubles the strength of one magnet. So using two layers of ferromagnetic material, in some respects, you can have twice the holding power, but at a lower cost.
So I just want to remind, I want to remind everyone that that Gwen has an amazing book which you can purchase. And if you are thinking about using magnets to mount anything, you should refer to Gwen's book, because it is the best way to get a better understanding of what you're getting yourself into. And yeah, I highly recommend it. So, but I would like to wrap everything up for us right now so that we can go to live question and answers.
Yes.
So thank you, panelists, and we'll see you in the real world in just a moment.
Wonderful. That was really great to see the accumulated knowledge and all that information. And now there are questions, and we're going to pass this back to Sam and work on the questions for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll move along. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. That was just such a great guide on how to work with magnets. I learned so much, so thank you so much for that. The first question we have here from Mark is, could you please clarify something? Which kind of magnet can be used with hot glue and which kind shouldn't be?
It's really something you can look up. And each of the permanent magnets have their own Curie temperature, as was mentioned earlier. And it just so happens that the other three permanent magnets have a much higher Curie temperature than the neodymium. And then they also, in particular, have the widest range between the maximum operating temperature and the Curie temperature, which is gradually, as you move closer to the Curie temperature, literally you lose all everything. So like with Laura's technique with the buttons, it turns out ferrite or ceramic magnets have a Curie temperature that's beyond the use of hot melt glue.
Thanks, Gwen. John's got a question that says, please explain the difference between the types of magnets you've used. So how strong, how permanent, and what makes rare earth magnets different?
Well, the beauty of rare earths is the size to strength ratio. Many people assume Maltby and Heidig Mishk used the ferrite magnets early on, but then the artifact had to be a sizable in order to fit the larger ferrodynamic. Anyway, I'm now so confused. Ferrite magnet to have the strength. Plus, you had to manipulate the orientation in order to acquire enough strength for a heavier artifact. For anyone who saw the window cleaning or those window cleaning ones that had the Alnico, because of the trade and economic situations of China and their monopoly, a lot of companies are really going backwards to sort of technology that is sort of they dusted off the cobwebs and now are really trying to make the weaker Alnico much stronger. So that's the Bro 9, and why these window cleaners could in essence have enough strength was because of this newer technology that has been done. But it's the size. It's still those 4 magnets that are inside the window cleaners are pretty big, whereas the fish things with the neodymium are pretty small with the same amount of pull force. That was a lot of information, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Thank you, Gwen. There's a question here from Kevin, and he says, what are any conservation drawbacks to using magnets?
I think the most one is the compression, and there are different materials that are ranked by their ability to regain their shape. And it turns out cellulose, and so hence paper, has a very low regaining once it's been compressed. So that's why paper conservators in particular are very uneasy about at least using magnets on the surface. Now, mind you, even if you mount a drawing or a work of art on paper, you know this already because of the window mat, and you'll see that there's the outer edge of that drawing will be more compressed over time just because of the window mat. So that's nothing really new, but that is, and also if you use, you don't really balance the strength of the magnet that you've selected with the delicacy of the artifact. So then you have a tendency to, tears happen or that kind of thing.
Thanks again, Gwen. There's a question here and a statement actually from Karen. Firstly, she's saying thank you for your demonstration of handling and the tool that reads polarity. She's asking, is there also another tool or way to read the strength of a magnet, to know if it's losing its strength and to label properly by strength, like the tool used to test battery strengths?
It's a Gauss meter. It's a very specific tool and very expensive also. I don't know if you have one, Gwen. Do you have one under your desk or something like that?
No, I don't have a Gauss meter. But oftentimes at universities, that, but the other, just a low tech way is just simply to use a compass, and the amount of swinging of the needle will give you an indication of the strength, and it's like a comparative. And if you just put it on a like graph paper, you can see at a certain point as you bring it further away where at some point that needle no longer goes. So that the Gauss meter kind of does the same thing. It just sort of gives you a number. But that's what I do. And actually they're, especially with the packing and shipping and that kind of thing, if I have a group of magnets and I'm trying to figure what size of box to make, the compass is really perfect for that. If the needle does not move, then you're set.
That's brilliant. Earl's got a question that says, what is the best way to keep magnets clean?
I don't know, Pierre, wow, with those super strong ones, how do you?
To keep magnets clean?
Yeah.
You keep them stored because especially when there's a lot of movement inside a gallery or in a space, even if you're not working metal around, they will have some very small parts of metal that they will all stick on the magnet. But it's a hard to answer question, because to keep a magnet clean, it's all about the context on where they are.
Okay, thank you. We might stick with Earl. He's got just a couple more questions. I'm going to group them together. He's asking, what about hazards with magnets, especially around children? And then he's also just wanting that confirmation that it's okay to use hot melt glue with magnets.
Well, I wouldn't use hot melt glue with the neodymium. Yes, you can sort of cool it off. I don't know. That's just, it's better just not to bother. But yeah, one of my favorite magnetic toys were those, like the cube of balls, and it went off the market because of the hazards with children. I think you just have to keep them stored and out of, arm's reach, on a high shelf.
Thank you, Gwen. Karen's asking a question around magnets and mounting, perhaps, being able to be knocked or disturbed. And she's asking, has anyone used a combination of magnets with armatures for security?
Yes. I did for some silversmith pieces that we displayed in our permanent galleries. I had to make a mount, which is kind of an arm and a small deck made of steel. And then it was a mug from a silver mug with a small cavity underneath. And I made a kind of an epoxy wedge with one magnet in it, and then put the mug on it, and after another magnet inside. But in this case too, I used I have difficult with this word, sweated poly, to have a barrier between the magnet and the silver.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. Francis is asking, is it possible to use magnets for mounting gold or silver objects? Any tips or solutions?
Well, silver and gold aren't ferrite. So there's, if you're not using the magnet to stick like what Pierre-Luc just said, if you're using two magnets in the way he did as a sandwich, that's a great solution, Pierre-Luc, for that. But right, silver and gold aren't going to have that magnetic. Something that Gwen said to us when we were recording, which I loved, was that magnets, when a magnet is just sitting there, it's just a thing. It doesn't, but when you bring another magnet or a piece of steel into play with it, and then it becomes alive and it does what magnets do, which is be a magnet. And I just love that. And it makes me think about the materials that we're using around with magnets. I think I just love that so much, Gwen.
You're so
Yeah,
sweet.
it's a great analogy.
But yeah, gold and silver are the metals that are attracted to magnets are ferrite, a ferromagnetic, para, like aluminum and stainless steel is para, and each of these there's a group. Then there's dia magnetic, and I believe that's what gold and silver is, but I'd have to look it out. But every metal is grouped by how it behaves in a magnetic field.
Perfect. Thanks, Gwen. We've got a question from Matthew, and he's talking about how he's installed a show with magnets holding up lots of posters, and the biggest challenge was separating the magnets while wearing nitrile gloves. And he's saying, it's difficult to do. The gloves got shredded at the fingertips. And he loves your magnet dispenser and positioner, but with smaller magnets, finger positioning seems necessary. So he's asking, are there other tips for better methods?
I believe that it's possible to use the Teflon wedge to install small magnets on some poster, even if they are very, very small, because you can just position the wedge at the right place, and with the end of the wedge in front of the other magnet that is underneath, and you just slide it slowly, and then they will stick together. It's even safer than arriving with the magnet in your hand and trying to put it in place. This could make a small shock or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And there are like wands with the magnet. Either you can buy them or you could make them yourself. That can be really helpful for that.
Perfect. And we'll just have one more question and then I'll hand back over to Jamie. Someone's asking, what about storing them in plastic?
I think Gwen should also answer to this one.
Oh. Yeah, that's how I started storing my magnets, and I lined them with thin ethafoam sheeting. So that was my first method before I then started putting them in the metal tins. But yeah, like the contact lens cases are really ideal for if you have a specific need of one magnet to be isolated from another magnet. And that may be because that you've toned one specific, you camouflaged it for one particular location, whereas the other one for another location, that kind of thing. But yeah, plastic is fine, it's great.
Great. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm going to hand back over to Jamie. Bye.
Thank you, Sam, for keeping all that moving. And thank you, Gwen and Laura and Pierre-Luc. The magnets are an amazing thing, and I just can't wait to see how they continue to develop as the years go by. So that is it for the first session for today. I want to thank you all for being with us. Today, there is not going to be a shop tour, but you can stay right here to see the wonderful poster on the Golden Mummies of Egypt, presented by Zoe Lansley, a freelance conservator in the UK. As you view, please add any questions to the question and answer function. She'll be available in the chat and Q&A to answer any questions you might have from 4:45 to 4:55 Eastern Time. So it's right now 4:15 Eastern Time. So have a great break, and we'll see you back here soon. Thank you so much.